The first Battlefield 6 beta weekend has come to an end, and it's pretty safe to say it was a huge success. Over 500,000 concurrent players on Steam alone. Not only did BF6 blow past its own Steam record, but it also beat the Call of Duty Steam record. And now that I've had some time with the beta and the "oh my god, this doesn't suck" factor has worn off a bit, I can see the rough spots a little more clearly. And without question, the worst thing about Battlefield 6 is... I'll save that for a little later in the video. Today's video is going to be a light review of the BF6 beta, but be prepared, this video isn't going to be blanket praise. Battlefield 6 is clearly on the path to be a big success, but I want it to be as good as it possibly can be, and some of the rough areas are honestly a bit surprising to me. Alright, let's start off with a little bit of a TLDR. The Battlefield 6 beta is great. It feels like a blast from the past. The gunfights are fantastic. I'm enjoying trying all the different weapons and the different builds. It's absolutely rekindled my original joy for the franchise and making me feel things that I haven't felt since playing Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4. Just locked into some of these amazing and intense gunfights that only those games could provide. I finally get to do that again in a modern title. It also brings some awesome new features like dragging players and VFX with explosions and dust and debris that are just on another level. But it's also fumbling in some areas that feel all too familiar for this studio. Class design is a mess when it really doesn't have to be, and player spotting and visibility is all over the place. Let's dive a bit deeper. Now, right off the bat, I gotta say the performance and stability of BF6 has been incredible for me. I know some people have had issues, but overall, I think we're looking at one of the best performing betas that we have seen from a Battlefield game, period. Even Battlefield 3, one of my favorite games in the series, was a hot mess of bugs and performance issues during the alpha and beta phase. BF6's beta feels extremely close to a launch candidate, and that is so refreshing for this studio. The frame rate that I'm able to hit at 4K resolution and ultra graphics is insane, around 200 FPS for a modern Battlefield game at launch, or before launch. This is not something I was expecting. And that's not even with any of the hot frame gen tech either. Now graphically, Battlefield 6 looks good on a technical level. The VFX artists, in my opinion, are doing a lot of the heavy lifting here with incredible looking particle effects. Long lasting smoke and debris literally changes the visibility of a battlefield mid-firefight, and it's extremely cool. I've been wanting games to do this more, but volumetric smoke and debris is one of the most expensive things you can do, and somehow DICE has figured out how to do it and keep the frame rates up. It looks fantastic. Now that said, when it comes to the visual presentation and map design, the game just isn't visually stunning in ways that I feel Battlefield 5 and Battlefield 1 achieved. Heck, even 2042 had some incredible looking maps and vistas. It feels like the art direction has swung way back towards Battlefield 3, which I personally feel is a bit of a downgrade. Take the new Liberation Peak map as an example. Battlefield 6's Mountaintop Village battle is one of the more whelming maps that I've seen. Putting it next to other Battlefield maps that had to deal with fighting amongst mountaintops, like say the gorgeous white snow and colorful village of Narvik from Battlefield 5, or Battlefield 1's grassy Monte Grappa and deep blue skies, Liberation Peak feels like a bland jumble of muted colors by comparison. It feels like the entire game has been run through a desaturation filter. In fact, that's exactly what they do with these types of games. They do heavy color grading, and that's what Battlefield 3 did. Heavy color grading with a blue tint, and BF6 seems to be following a little too closely in its footsteps. And thus the visuals, despite being a technical upgrade in some ways, also makes me feel like we're just moving backwards artistically. And the game has yet to give me a single wow moment outside of enjoying some of the amazing explosions and smoke effects. Pretty much every other Battlefield game I've played over the last decade has had these moments where you just walk out and are amazed by the visuals, and BF6 just hasn't been able to achieve that for me. And I think a lot of that is simply down to the art direction, which I personally just don't jive with. Now, when it comes to the moment-to-moment gameplay, whether it's the gunplay or vehicle gameplay, I've been overall very impressed. Things feel far more dialed in and fun right off the bat compared to past Battlefield betas. It's not perfect, there's definitely some weird TTK damage dumping that doesn't make sense, and I think DICE is aware of this, and some guns are clearly worse than others and need some balance, but for a starting place, things feel pretty good. And there's no fundamental design problems like I would argue Battlefield 1 had that required a huge amount of overhauling throughout the course of the game's life cycle to get things back into a good place. I think we're starting with a good foundation this time around that we can just build on rather than completely overhaul. Weapons are fun, they change significantly with upgrades and feel malleable enough to nudge them towards your preferred set of features. Each weapon category feels more or less distinct, perhaps not as drastic as Battlefield 1 or Battlefield 5's weapon categories, but for a modern shooter, I think DICE has done a really good job with differentiating the weapons as much as they can. I've also really enjoyed the armored gameplay, which I see seems to be one of the more debated topics. The controls are a little clunky between first and third person aiming, and I haven't quite gotten the sensitivity to where I like it, but it feels much more in line with the Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 armor balance. Tanks and APCs are very good, but they can also die in a matter of seconds if you just push too far with them. If you're used to Battlefield 1 or Battlefield 5 armor balance, this is a stark contrast, but one that feels more fitting for a modern game. Still, I have a feeling we're going to be dealing with the balance of a lot more anti-armor weapons once the full game launches, plus vehicle upgrades that'll have stuff like active defense systems that'll block incoming rockets. So it's really hard to give too much feedback on the armor versus infantry gameplay at this point, since we just don't have all the tools that we're going to have. Now, player visibility, 3D spotting, and the light-dark transitions are not in a good place for Battlefield 6. This has been an area of balance that the Battlefield series began to struggle with as its visuals got better and better over the years. More tools and features were needed to allow for quick target acquisition in these cluttered, highly realistic-looking environments. Battlefield 6 has a lot of monochromatic levels and soldiers that blend in. Combined with its new amazing VFX and smoke everywhere, seeing enemies can be extremely challenging. To make it easier, DICE has added what I would call an extremely aggressive 3D spotting system, where if you're just kind of looking close to where an enemy might be, they'll get a little diamond icon over their head showing you exactly where they are, even if you can't see them. So instead of needing to use your eyes to find the enemy, you just shoot at the red marker. We used to call this Triangle Shooter 3000 back in the days of BF3 and BF4. Those games had amazing visuals, and all we did was just look for the triangles to shoot at. The only difference now is that those triangles are now diamonds. DICE still hasn't found a great solution to the visibility problem, and in some ways has actually made it even worse. So they've just added a super aggressive spotting system, which breaks a lot of the things that I like about scanning an environment for enemies with my own eyes, and it also is extremely unfair to players who like to try and blend in with the environment, move sneakily, slowly. They're totally screwed in this situation. Hidden in a bush, it doesn't matter. Your enemies will see a big red diamond marking your spot, even if they can't see you, as I've shot plenty of players that I had no idea were there, but the game was basically just saying, hey, there's a guy right here in this bush, in this window, wherever. Now, to make matters worse, Battlefield 6 has some pretty bad light-dark transitions. This is basically an automatic exposure control that, for whatever reason, most AAA games these days think we need it for your immersion, despite games existing and working perfectly fine before we had auto exposure control everywhere. If you were able to turn it off, it would give you a huge advantage of being able to see into dark areas while in a light environment. Sure, auto exposure control kind of mimics reality, but it's also not great for gameplay, and especially in a game where there's many dark windows to get shot from, not being able to see enemies in those windows kinda sucks. So in this situation, DICE has crafted an experience that's visually very chaotic and cluttered, and they've tried to fix it by giving players aggressive auto spotting. The good news is that this can be fixed. They've shown that they've been able to dial it in much better with Battlefield 5. but it took a long time for them to do that, and I'm not that hopeful for a fast, easy improvement here. This issue is a very complex one that involves adjusting exposure settings, all the logic in how auto-spotting works, which I'm sure is extremely complex, and maybe even tweaking soldier shaders like they did with Battlefield 5 to make them pop out from their environments a little bit more. Now let's talk about some of the new features that are extremely good. Weapon customization and stats. It is really fun swapping out weapon parts and seeing the stats change, and also putting a point value to different weapon parts is going to give DICE a lot more freedom and control over how they want to make attachments. If an attachment feels overpowered, make it cost a lot more so you can't put a lot of other good attachments on. It's a much easier system to balance, and it gives players a lot of kind of Lego building fun as they craft their weapon. Also, being able to see the specific stat numbers as you change and swap out parts like muzzle velocity, reload times, etc. It's just so refreshing to be able to understand what you're doing to your weapon in-game rather than having to exit out and watch a YouTube video or go to a SimThick website to look at the stats. And I'll still probably look at some of the weapon stat sites to go a bit deeper at some point, but this is a hell of an upgrade compared to past games where you kind of just had to guess what might be good. Now, soldier dragging is one of the best new features in the game. It just works, and it works well. I don't really have any feedback for how it should work differently. DICE seems to have tested the crap out of it. It is so useful in a firefight, dragging somebody out of the line of fire so that they don't wake up to a hail of bullets. It seems like such a simple feature, but I know the under-the-hood complexity of this system must be anything but simple. It's truly a game changer, and I hope DICE gives themselves a good pat on the back for this one. I personally didn't think that they could do a good dragging feature. I thought it would be really clunky or just generally useless, but I'm happy to have been proven wrong. Alright, it's time to talk about what I think Battlefield 6's worst aspect is. Want to take a guess? It's their class design and open weapon system. DICE seems to have abandoned all the class design improvements that the studio made for Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5, and they just threw it away. Literally, some of the best class balance this franchise has ever seen were in BF1 and BF5, and instead of following in their footsteps, we have something much closer to 2042's garbage class system. Battlefield 6 now has a support/medic role, and an assault that doesn't really have a purpose right now. I know DICE are going to switch the spawn beacon from the recon to the assault after the beta, but to see the recon's most important gadget get swapped 2 months before launch shows just how poorly thought out these classes actually are, and we are now in full Band-Aid fix mode. I think combining the support and medic class into a single class is the foundation of their problem. When DICE has used a dedicated medic class in their games and the assault class becomes more of the anti-vehicle class, it has ended up being much better distribution of roles and abilities. And then having a custom weapon selection for each role was used to handcraft their combat experience rather than trying to make them fit into a blanket combat range and blanket weapon category. DICE had already designed the building blocks for strong class identities with BF1 and BF5. BF1 didn't have assault rifles exactly, so it was a little different, but Battlefield 5's template would have translated into BF6 perfectly. Locked weapons, assaults would get a lot of the anti-vehicle weapons, medic would get SMGs and DMRs, support gets ammo and LMGs and shotgun, recon gets bolt actions and some SMG pistol type options, spawn beacons, and spots. It was so much more interesting to have specific weapon lists and classes and well-defined roles, and while you might be playing BF6 and completely oblivious to all of this stuff and enjoying yourself, which honestly I was as well, it's hard to ignore when you know how much better it could be. Now DICE is scrambling to make the assault a worthwhile class by giving it a spawn beacon, and everyone is pretending that it's fine to give healing and ammo to one class for whatever reason. It's 2042 class balance all over again, and this is more than a we'll fix it after launch problem. I think we're going to be stuck with trying to duct tape fix a fundamentally bad class system for the rest of this game's development. I hope I'm wrong on that, but it seems like what it's going to be. Now, all that said, there's some good news here. This is not game-breaking. No, Battlefield 6 is still incredibly fun and fundamentally functional. We tend to forget that Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4, some of the greatest Battlefield games in the franchise, had incredibly uneven class balance. Battlefield really doesn't need equal use of all classes to work, but Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5 showed us just how good it could be when class identities were much stronger. Maybe we'll get that back someday, but I don't think Battlefield 6 is going to be the game that does it. Now, some of the more debated feedback subjects for the beta revolve around map sizes and server browsers, two areas that I think are hard to judge in the beta since we, 1, only have a handful of maps and the larger ones that have been promised are not in the beta, and 2, we don't have the Portal server browser to judge its full functionality yet. But I hope DICE can deliver us the right tools for community building. It's an important part and often neglected feature that helps games last far beyond their life cycles. And regarding the maps, I will say that yes, the maps feel much smaller and more chaotic compared to past games, and I hope that there's a better mixture of large and small maps. I think the Battlefield franchise is the best when you can alternate between them to mix up the different gameplay styles. Now, beyond some of my gripes with the game, I think Battlefield 6's beta is solid. It's exciting to play, the firefights are deeply satisfying, and the VFX really are amazing, and it works even under load of 500,000 concurrent players on Steam alone. DICE actually seems prepared this time around, and it's giving me confidence in this team to deliver a stable, ready-to-play game on day one. Plus, the full game is coming with a battle royale, a new type of conquest mode, a single player, and possibly more unannounced stuff, so there's going to be a lot more to look at and play with at launch. This is, of course, just a beta review that is looking at a early access pie slice of the game. Nonetheless, I hope you guys enjoyed this review video. If you did, don't forget to drop me a like, subscribe for more content like it, and if you want to know why I've been looking at games with a little bit more of a developer eye lately, it's because I've been working on my own game called Sea-Beams, which is a top-down spaceship action RPG. I've been making regular devlogs about the development process. I've been enjoying it so much, and you should absolutely check out one of the devlogs here. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.